welcome to the end of year special. And I always look forward to this one. Martin and Phil, g'day.
Good to see you, Brad.
Nice to see you.
I always like this one because it's always a bit of fun. Well, it's fun for us. I'm not sure if it's fun for anyone listening, but they have been pretty popular. But so this what we're doing in this podcast. We're going to wrap up some of our thoughts of the year in terms of some of the podcasts we might have enjoyed, perhaps our favourite paper or two, and maybe a few other things thrown in between. So I reckon that's about it. Martin, this year, 25, 26 odd podcasts.
Yeah. It's we've gone to bi-weekly, probably due to pressure work on your behalf.
And downloads have been pretty good. So thanks to everyone for listening in. And what's been our popular one this year, Martin?
Yeah, what's the most popular pod?
Do you know what? You're firing questions at me with no prep at all.
Most popular one. This is what we like to do, because if you could see Martin's face now, he's looking a bit like, what are you doing to me?
Yeah.
Phil and I are just going to keep drilling him for a minute.
You've got to keep drilling for a second while I just...
Free screen in front of him and he's searching.
Is this, Phil, where we've got to come up with some kind of space to...
it's called filling.
A filler talk. Yeah, right. Yeah, okay.
Well, I was
play some Christmas jingles. Actually, you can just cut all this out.
Okay.
Here we go. What is it?
I know the MRSA one with Michael Borge was pretty popular, but I can't remember when we did it.
We did have an issue with our stats as well, I think.
That's my mistake. I didn't realise that you had to...
So there's stats and there's stats.
Okay, I was right. It was Michael Borge who was our number one, and he did creep into the year because he was on January the...
there's a bit of bias here, isn't there? Based on when you come out. Yeah. So who else is in the top five?
That's over. Okay. Well, the CPE knowledge with Aoife and Deirdre from Ireland, that's in the top five. C. Diff is always popular. That's in the top five as well.
Is that the one? Mark Wilcox. Who was Mark Wilcox? Yeah,
Mark Wilcox. Yeah. And interestingly, the toilet one on pneumonia and C. Diff. That was that was a fun chat. That one, I like that one.
That was going to be my pod of the year.
Oh, well, tell us about
it. Well,
is that your pod of the year?
Well, I want you to tell me about it because it's about plumes and toilet plumes and
okay.
C. Diff.
Okay. Well, let's talk pod of the year. Let's talk pod of the year.
Yeah. So that was yours, was it, Phil?
That was mine, and just from an unusual point of view, I think it was interesting, but also, logical when you think about it.
And if I recall, some of that discussion was about studies that looked at, seat up or seat down when you flush the toilet, and there were some studies that say seat down, creates a bit more pressure. So you got that pressure's got to go somewhere, and it goes under the rim and flies out. And others perhaps saying the opposite. So. I don't think we landed on whether we should flush with the toilet lid up or down after that one, did we?
I think I would always put the toilet lid down.
Lid down?
Yeah.
Well, in a hospital, of course, you don't have a toilet lid. Not in the UK. So you don't have
Or in public toilets in Australia. Often don't have lids.
So what do you do? Do you take a disposable toilet cover around, Phil, with you and put it on the toilet when you pee?
I was going to say maybe you could just lodge yourself there until after it's flushed, that might not be the right thing to do. I don't know.
It may, well, unless you were going to disinfect your rear end afterwards. No.
What about you, Martin? What was your favourite pod of the year?
Podcast of the year. Actually, I quite like the one that I did not that long ago with Kenzie Seaman from. She's from the Netherlands, or she's working in Belgium at the moment. But about the endoscope, that through whole genome sequencing, they found. They had linked cases and I thought, there's a case on the paediatric ward and a case on elderly care ward. And it turned out they both had ERCPs, and they sampled the scope using what they would normally do 6 times, including some quite hefty methods of checking, and grew absolutely nothing.
Huh?
So they end up with the manufacturer taking the scope apart and found biofilm in there. And I'm thinking, where does that leave everybody? Because unless you're whole genome sequencing, you won't know you've got these outbreaks, because would you normally link a Citrobacter on a paediatric ward and a general ward? unless you're looking at the antibiogram and maybe thinking, well, could that be? But often that sort of thing that could pass by. I'm hoping these days with something like the machine learning, people might pick up on that through just the normal course of their work. So, but then how do you determine whether there's something going on? Because nobody's going to take apart every single scope. And I did actually drop Jean-Yves Maillard, a good friend of ours, a note just to say, do biofilms inside a scope give off some sort of extracellular substance that you might be able to detect? So even though you may not be able to grow the organism, might you be able to detect the presence of a chemical or an organic substance that they give out, and therefore that might be a way of testing to say, yes, we know we've got a biofilm in this scope, we don't know what it is because we can't grow it. So he's gone away to think about that.
Yeah, good.
Because I can't see going to the hospital admin, well, let's just trash the scopes once a year just to see if there's anything in there.
Yeah.
And unless you're doing whole genome sequencing and everything, you're not going to know. So I thought that was interesting, really.
I did too. And in fact, it was a very popular podcast, that one too, I think, in terms of downloads. Very quickly.
How about you, Brad?
I actually think the ones I'd probably take the ones I enjoyed the most doing, I'll take that approach. And it's probably probably two or three. I liked the one that we did from ECMID, where we reflected on the first day, I think it was, of the ECMID conference and some of the things that we'd heard. I might not have been the first day because Phil missed the first day of ECMID and missed all the best talks. But
thanks to British Airways.
But and we talked about the new WHO sort of transmission-based precautions framework, and I think, Martin, you integrated that with Kath Noakes, and I thought that was a really nice way to piece together some of the stuff we'd heard at the conference, some of the stuff that was brand new out of WHO, and then getting someone in to talk about it. So I think that was, for me, was a highlight. I also like the IPS conference live podcast that we did at the conference. That went really well, considering it was hard to do. Well, technically hard to do, but the interesting there, after the first person got up and asked a question, which took about 15 minutes, we had to sort of talk about things with our guests because no one was getting up and asking a question. And then once the first person got up and asked the question, there was a line of people queuing to ask the panel questions. So I really enjoyed that one too.
So do you think that should be a permanent installment for future conferences?
Well, I think I think it depends on who you've got talking during the day. And I think we were able to piece together a bit of a thread to get those speakers on. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to do it at another conference. I'd happily do it at another conference. So, There's also another highlight, and that was having to re-record podcasts that Martin failed to record.
Error.
Oh, okay.
Error.
So that happened twice, I think. We have an interclean. Or was that a deleting episode, Martin? I'm not sure if that was...
I suspect that was a failure to record, and then it happened at IPS as well.
Yeah, I'm only saying in jest. Martin does a fantastic job with all the editing. We rely on him to do it all. So
he does.
Not going to take the mick too much, but I guess that was a couple of times this year. But that's what happens with technology.
Speaking of conferences, the other, apart from the toilet plume, the other podcasts I've really enjoyed has been the little poster sessions that we did live, or we did at the conferences that we went to. We did a couple from ECMID, and I think there's some more coming up from ACIPC.
Yes. They'll be out next year, I think, when they're on.
Yeah, that'll be the first one of next year, yeah.
Yeah, but so I think that was a really, posters often hold a gem of a story or a study in there that don't often get picked up. So it's great to have the authors standing by their posters so we can chat to them.
I love posters.
I agree, actually. Good. I also do the ECMID ones too.
Yeah, so you two have travelled a fair bit this year. Not so much me. Best conference you've been to this year?
Martin, you go first.
I mean, I enjoyed ECMID. or SMID Global,
yeah.
or whatever the rebranding
Global,
is
yeah.
now.
What's it called
I
now?
just wish,
Global.
SMID Global, yeah. And although I just wish they wouldn't put all the infection prevention stuff in a cluster. I mean, the number of posters they had for 2 hours on the last day, when they could easily have just split them up through the days, so that there would have been other days we might have wanted to go and talk to the poster session. So, and you guys were actually rushing off to get flights as well, but that was a disappointment in that I would like to see more. Really, I wasn't quite so happy with some of the presentations, but that was a good meeting, and the IPS I thought was an excellent program this year. Yours?
I agree. Actually, I really enjoyed ESCMED Global, because I thought there was more infection control content. I mean, I don't just go for the infection control content. I think there's plenty of great stuff, obviously, on micro and infectious diseases, and that's the main part. But I thought there was a fair chunk of infection control, same at the same time. And, there was probably, 250 posters on infection control to get around in 2 hours, which made it really hard. But there were certain sessions within the ESCMID Global that I really liked, and others I thought were a bit biased based on who put those together, I guess, or the whatever theme they were trying to put together. But so that was probably a bit disappointing. I really liked IPS. For me, it was probably the best IPS I've ever been to. There's always a practical-based theme, and there was always a sciencey sort of theme. And I liked how that worked, because, you could sort of dip in and out of different things. And there was a particular chat there, Mark Webber, who did the review of do disinfectants cause or contribute to antimicrobial resistance. And he dissected all the evidence on that, I thought, beautifully, and came to the conclusion that there was no evidence to support that. But I thought that was an example of a really well put together presentation. There were plenty of those at that conference, so I enjoyed that one. What about you, Phil?
We get to say this. Phil's on mute.
There's the first one.
That's it. Sorry, I was having a cough. So I only got to 2 this year, and that was ECME Global and Asipsi, and difficult to compare the two because they're two different beasts.
Which one did you prefer then, Phil?
It's always nice to travel overseas to go to a conference, and Barcelona is always a lovely place to visit, isn't it? So, as opposed to the Asipsi conference, which was in my hometown in Melbourne, which I see every day. So I think this year ECME Global will take the cup.
And what about if the Asipsi conference program was in Barcelona and ESCMID was in Melbourne? What would you go for then, Phil?
Gee, Brett, that's a hard thing to probably would depend on the weather.
The forecast, plenty of sunshine through today with seasonal temperatures, which should reach our normal high of around 82 degrees.
All right. Well, what about papers? Are there any papers this year that you thought, I like that paper, or that you didn't realise and then came across later on and thought that was a good paper? We could do good ones. We could also do bad ones. Oh, actually, that's bad. Let's not do bad ones. I mean,
no.
Name and shame.
Yeah. I had a look at what papers that interested me this year, and I thought actually there's so many papers, and actually ESCME, there was still people talking about drains and what do we put down a drain and how can we stop drains getting infected, rather than actually what can we do to stop contamination coming out. And a really simple paper from Curtis Donsky's group with Jennifer Cadnam, going around looking at what were the super splashing sinks in the organization, and therefore what could you do with the flow to stop the super splashing. I thought that's exactly what we should be doing. Just walk around, actually look at, because every sink's different, the water pressure is different, the positioning of the faucet's slightly different. Just walk around the organisations, look at what a splash radius is, think, can we actually do something about this to try and ameliorate that, rather than worry about what's down the drain, because stuff's always going to be down the drain. It's the whole point of the sink. You're just going to wash your hands and down it goes. And we're definitely going to feed it. Even soap and skin sprays are going to feed it. So you're not going to stop that. And I'm not very comfortable about chucking disinfectant after disinfectant after disinfectant down the sink, because it's going to get into the wastewater systems, depending on what you're using. We put all sorts of things down there anyway. So I thought that was a really nice practical paper on how you could actually do something about it locally. Apart from my point of view, would be to stick a sticker on the ground saying, whatever you do, don't store any kit in this distance. Because we're going to say, don't store equipment beside the sink, but human nature is it's a space, and we're short of space, and we're going to put things in there. So I thought that was just an interesting and practical paper, to be honest.
Yeah. What about you, Phil?
So the paper I've picked is a little bit different. We haven't spoken about it, but it's one of those papers. It speaks to the topic where, you know, a big event has happened and we all sort of say, yeah, we need to learn from this so we know better next time. And we know that in our business, we have a little crisis and we get back to work and we continue to work. And Brett, often we don't have a time to reflect. And so the paper that I have picked is been written by Matthew Bush.
Oh, yes.
And that's called the Post-Implementation Quarantine Recommendations that Support Preparedness, the Systematic Review and Quarantine Implementation Framework. So what we're doing...
Where was that published, Phil?
Sorry, that was published in... Sorry, yeah, good. Thanks for asking. It's the Australian Journal of Infection, Disease and Health.
Yeah, that's a great journal, that one.
Released in... it was published in August. But I like the fact that this group, the investigators, the researchers, are actually taking time to look back and reflect and see what worked and what didn't work with regards to quarantine. And it's a really interesting paper. I've read it a few times now, and it does point to a lot of the gaps. And it's an international review. It's not just about Australia quarantine. It's about quarantine that was published across the world and identifies many of the gaps and does come up with a framework that suggests that governments could use to inform future preparedness planning. So, you know, we all move on very quickly from our crises in the past, but it is important that we do look back and learn from these crises and so we know what to do better next time.
The problem is we'll be around next time, and this document will be prepared for a government, but a government who gets stuck with this next time won't have actually had any experience of it, and there'll be a different group of politicians, and
that's
right. It's going to be very difficult to get them to listen, I think.
It'll be 20 governments down the track who...
Sure.
Yes,
well, hopefully, but I suspect not that many.
Well, yeah.
Matthew also did a presentation at the ISIPSI conference, Phil. I'm not sure if you managed to catch that one, but that was his review, taking that framework but looking at it from the Australian context, and it was mapping all the different components of hotel quarantine in Australia. And you know, as I was sitting there listening to it, it was an exceptionally complex program. And people just think people go off a plane and they go into hotel quarantine. It was a heck of a lot more complicated than that when you think about some of the decisions that were made around Grand Prix or tennis tournaments or relatives, dying relatives. You know, people who were sick or couldn't isolate in the community, people with mental health challenges. It was people who were in custody. So, you know, and that's just naming a few. There were repatriation flights from the Middle East during that time and all kinds of stuff. So it was an interesting thing when he actually mapped it out. You thought that was I'm glad he did it because it was actually an exceptionally complex thing. And then I thought that's probably why I had sleepless nights when I was involved with it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So what else have you been reflecting on this year, Brett? What's your biggest
Well,
reflection?
I've been reflecting on what papers I like, Martin.
Okay.
A couple came to mind, actually. And I didn't come across these originally, but it wasn't until Jason Kwong did a top papers of the year presentation at the ISIPSI conference. And I always think they're one of the best talks. You know, if you're ever going to go to a talk at an infection control conference, for me, it's got to be your top papers.
I love them. Yeah. Yeah, Stefan Harbath did a great job at ESME Global as well.
Oh, he did, didn't he? And Jason Kwong also did a good job because it was very similar to how Stefan did it. He presented the paper, presented the methodology quickly, the results quickly. It's talked about the weaknesses and talked about the strengths. And anyway, one of the papers that Jason referred to was called Lowering the Acquisition of Multi-Drug Resistant Organisms with Pulsed Xenon LAMP Studies. It's called a LAMP study. Basically what they were doing, it was a cluster, of course, it was a cluster randomized controlled double-blinded study published in Clinical Infectious Diseases. And what they basically did was have 15 different wards in a couple of different hospitals. Some got randomized to a UVC on terminal clean, and some got so it was a normal clean plus UVC. Oh, sorry, not UVC. It was pulsed xenon UV, and then there was a sham UV which did nothing, plus the terminal clean, and they had a washout period, and then they did a crossover. And look, the long and short of it was that they found that there was no difference in their outcomes, which was environmentally implicated healthcare-associated infections. And that's a discussion for another day, perhaps. But they found no difference between the sham and the pulsed xenon ultraviolets. And their conclusion really was that perhaps it doesn't work. Why I like that, apart from I thought it was a well-designed study, and also they do come with limitations on perhaps some of the attribution that you have to do. They talked about a lot of patients moving between wards within the hospital, which is always going to be difficult to control for and manage statistically. And also the definitions around environmentally implicated healthcare-associated infections. But nonetheless, I think for me, it was a really well-designed study, as much as you could do in a pragmatic sense. But it also just made you think that just because something in a lab tells you it works doesn't necessarily mean it may work in real life. And for me, that was what I got out of it. And I like that because it actually has a lot of implications for a lot of things we do in infection control, where things are done, or someone will say to you, "Oh, look, we get a 16,000 log reduction in the of X," and in reality, it may or may not happen in clinical practice or on wards or in hospitals or healthcare settings. And so I'm not suggesting that does or doesn't work. I think the authors suggest that there's some more work that needs to get done, but did cast some doubt there. And that's why I looked at it.
What author has never suggested more work needs to be done?
That author said nobody.
No, said nobody. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I like that one. There was actually one other quick one, if I may. And it was, oh no, I've just lost it. It was I
love the way you're giving me a great opportunity to do a lot of editing.
Yeah, plenty of edits.
It was in JAMA by Andreas Widmar, was the lead author. It was povidone iodine versus chlorhexidine, gluconate, and alcohol for perioperative skin antisepsis. It was an RCT, multi-centered, 3,500 patients, comparing povidone iodine and alcohol with chlorhexidine, gluconate, alcohol for SSI after abdo surgery, cardiac surgery. And they found that there was no difference, and that basically that povidone iodine was not inferior to chlorhexidine, gluconate, both in alcohol. So I thought that was a fascinating study as well. So
yeah, I mean, that was the one that needed to be done, wasn't it? Because the Daruish paper used aqueous iodine versus alcoholic chlorhexidine. So
yeah,
but you're right.
Yeah, there was also an issue with COVID-19, so they had to shorten the follow-up post-cardiac surgery. Yeah. Because of COVID-19. So it was just before COVID-19, but only recently came out. So I like that one. Yeah.
Go on, Phil. You were going to say something. I butted over you.
Oh no, I know you love your grade recommendations, Brett. Where would that sit on the? Would that informal recommendation, strong recommendation?
Yeah, look, it would certainly contribute to some of the other studies that have been done out there. It was well designed, and so I think it would be up there to inform recommendations. There's so many careful things you need to think about. Like I mentioned what they did, but there's a lot of nuances in what I just said, including that both povidone iodine and chlorhexidine gluconate were both in alcohol, and of course, abdo surgery and cardiac surgery. So, it's important to read those things carefully, because it doesn't mean that is translatable to other types of surgery. I guess it does, most are in alcohol. Is it the alcohol that's actually doing the work as opposed to the iodine or the chlorhexidine gluconate? So,
because there was a move away from alcohol-based surgical prep for a while, wasn't there? Because of people connecting patients up to the national grid system with diathermy and putting them on fire, which is mainly due to impatience on behalf of the surgeon who just wouldn't let it dry. So, yeah. Now, you mentioned grade then, Phil, and I'll just ask Brett this. So at ESCMID Global, both in one of the speakers doing the papers of the year and in many other talks, there was a paper, an RCT, on using probiotic cleaning versus disinfectant versus detergent.
Yeah.
Where would that fit in with grade then? Do you think that informs a...
No. I think that study and that study was published in eMedicine, Environmental Cleaning to Prevent Hospital-Acquired Infections, and it was a cluster randomized crossover control trial, as you said, comparing soap, disinfectant, and probiotic cleaning. That wouldn't get anywhere in terms of grade recommendations for me. If I was on the panel looking at recommendations, it wouldn't cut the mustard, unfortunately. And a few reasons for that. The study was exceptionally underpowered, and there were actually some confusing assumptions made about sample sizes, but it was exceptionally underpowered. And there was this goes to the point of actually making sure you actually read papers and don't just read the conclusions, because if you read the conclusion of the paper, you might be misled, because it says that routine surface disinfection proved not superior to soap-based or probiotic cleaning. The study design was never to determine non-inferiority. So there's a fundamental flaw there to start with before you think about sample sizes and various other things. So for me, what this paper is, and by the way, the paper itself, in terms of the design, was really good. And, these studies are so hard to do. So I don't want to be critical of what the work here. There's a pragmatic study, and it was a really well-designed study in that sense. But fortunately, there's never had enough people in it. And I didn't like how some of those conclusions were made relative to the study design. So for me, this is a great example of an absence of evidence. And an absence of evidence is very different to saying there's no evidence for it. So I'm not saying that those authors are incorrect. I'm saying that study didn't show that. And it's an absence of evidence. That is, it still may or may not be the case, those conclusions, because we couldn't make any conclusions because of the challenges with sample size and some of the other statistical methods. So I think that's a good example. We do live in this absence of evidence domain in infection control, and it's not that there isn't evidence. It's not all that evidence is saying you shouldn't. So I'm not saying that they're incorrect. I'm just saying that for me, it's an absence of evidence to inform either way. So for that reason, I wouldn't be putting this into any kind of recommendation.
Yeah, I had a really good read of that paper because it was mentioned so often at that conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at what they were actually using, and they're probably, for pragmatic reasons, using what the hospital normally used, which meant they were using for their disinfectant, a quat-based formulation that has a 15-minute contact time.
Yes, 15 minutes is a very long time.
15 minutes is a very long time.
Something wet for 15 minutes.
Well, yeah. So I thought that was interesting.
Not so practical.
Yeah. And they also said that all of their cleaning agents, including the probiotic, were used with a cloth with 80% Vicose and 20% polypropylene. Now, the problem with Vicose is it's like a cellulose type product. So there's a really good chance that the quat they used was going to bind to that cloth. And they would have been better using a synthetic microfiber or a completely synthetic cloth to stop that happening, because we know that quat, they will bind. They're electrically charged. They'll bind to natural products, natural substances. So there was a little bit of a flaw in the design as well. And I wish they published the design first and let people have a look at the design and then go to do the study. But, people are jumping on this, and I get why they're jumping on it, because, I was at a meeting last week in Belgium, and a good third of the audience were actively considering using probiotics because they've seen an RCT. And I get why, because I think when people want to implement some research, it sort of fits with what their desires are, and who wouldn't want a cleaning agent which is definitely non-damaging to antimicrobial resistance. It's likely to be highly environmentally friendly, non-toxic, etc., and no occupational health issues with it. And so it fits with everybody's desires. I just don't think we're there with the studies yet. And there was a narrative review published in ARIC, which is more of an expert review, because they reviewed, I think, 12 papers. And it was mostly, and they say this in the paper, this was mostly the authors of the papers that did the review, which for me is a bit like marking your own homework. So it wasn't overly critical of the studies they included in the review. And there was certainly no bias assessment or anything like that. But people are jumping on it because they've seen a review, they've seen an RCT. All I'm saying to people is read the papers. And it may well be, and I'd love it to be true, that if we get really good, well-designed studies, adequately powered, that this is entirely correct. And I would welcome that. But I just think we're not quite there with the studies yet. So as part of my talk in Belgium, it's like, how long before you actually publish a piece of research does it get into practice? I think it's 17 years. People have 17 years. How does that happen? Well, that's because you need more studies. It takes a long time to get into a guideline, etc. And I think we need better quality studies.
Yeah.
But I'd love it to
Did
be
anybody take up the issue with a letter to the editor or anything? Any follow-up?
I only came across this paper at ESCMID Global, and it was published in 2023. So we did write a letter to the editor, and because it didn't meet a 1-month time frame of publication, it didn't proceed further. But for anyone who's interested in this, please get in contact, because I would happily to share that what we had written, including recalculating their sample sizes, and we've published that on an open access link so that people can look at the assumptions and the sample size calculations. But the other interesting thing that I found with that paper is that if you actually look at the MRSA infections, noting the study was really underpowered, right? But there was 0.127 in the SOAP arm and 0.022 in the disinfectant arm. And it does make me wonder what would happen if that result held true and it was sufficiently powered, whether that result would actually be the opposite to what the conclusions were in that paper. Yeah, that's why I think there's a little bit more work to do. And I guess that's why GRADE is an example, looks for directionality, and so does meta-analysis. So you have multiple papers saying the same thing and looking at things in relatively the same way. And once you get that kind of body of evidence, it helps inform stronger recommendations. And I really do hope that probiotics are one of the solutions, and we don't have to use potent disinfectants in the healthcare environment if we don't need to. But we do need good evidence to make sure that that's not going to cause harm before doing it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a leap of faith at the moment. I mean, given that it takes 17 years to get evidence into practice, I'm hoping that we get good results from your HAPPEN study on reducing healthcare-associated pneumonia that isn't ventilated, because if it takes 17 years into practice, I'm really going to need it to begin.
It will be. Well, that's true, man. Well, I mean, that's interesting. That study is halfway through now, and I think we've got about 5,000 or 6,000 people in that study so far, and I think we've got to get to 10 or 11,000. So it's on track. It's good to have you both part of that study. So I'm sure we'll be talking more about that towards the back end of next year.
Yeah.
On to merrier things. What are we doing for our little festive holiday break? Anybody doing anything interesting?
I'm planning on cooking for 14.
That's at your place, man?
Yeah.
Nice. You've got a tree you can use a bit of a firewood at the back.
Yeah, well, yeah, I have. Yeah, I had a larch come down last week in the storm. No, I mean, we won't be leading the outdoor lifestyle on Christmas that you two are going to be leading here, because it'll probably be about 2 degrees. So it's wrap up, keep warm, and enjoy the festivities indoors. Whereas I hope you two are doing something a bit more exotic.
Well, my Christmas day usually consists in the morning of catching up with friends at the beach. We go down and catch up with friends for a couple of hours at the beach, and then we go our separate ways to do family-related things. And then I'll be off camping after that. So I'm looking forward to that. And a lot of cricket tournaments with my kids in scorching hot weather, no doubt, in Western New South Wales. Phil, are you having any time off?
Just a week or so, but, good food, good wine, good company, and the Test cricket involved. So I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah.
Well, it's been another good year. I've enjoyed doing the podcasts, and I also wanted to give a shout out to Martin, who has carried the can a lot this year, because I think, well, I know I can't speak for myself. I've been pretty tied up with other things. And thanks, Martin, for your massive contribution this year.
Yes.
Not being employed, retired, actually gives me a little bit more time than you guys. Before we finish, can I just mention a paper? Well, not really a paper. It's a commentary that's just appeared in Clinical Infectious Diseases.
Oh, I thought it might have been your commentary.
No. No, we're not going to talk about that one. It's about voices of ID, and it's interestingly entitled. It's by Darcy Wootton. It's called "The Arrivals Gate at Heathrow Airport," and I think it's open access. And I'm thinking, where's this going? You know, it's talking about people arriving at an airport, and everybody's pleased to see everybody. And the gist of it is around the fact that ID fellowship programs aren't filling in the States at the moment, and the concern for that. And I think often infection prevention posts are difficult to fill as well. And it then goes to talk about how you attract people into your specialty. And I really quite enjoyed this because they said instead of talking to somebody, say, coming to work in ID, you know, you're like, you know, we want people with these qualifications who are prepared to work hard and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, they're suggesting a less traditional approach would be talking about why we do this. And I thought, I'll just have a quick look at job adverts for infection prevention staff in the UK. And they were all along about, you know, you must have an interest in infection control. You must have some experience in infection control. Come and join our team. Rather than actually why we do this. And I was thinking about, we have to be better at phrasing this, I think. You know, if you started off, do you want to make a difference in a specialty that's actually driven by compassion, science, and advocacy, rather than you must have some infection control experience? I think we might attract some different people because I don't know about. I'm just going to ask you this question: why do you do this job? Why do you work in infection prevention? I work in it because it's fascinating, and because when I came into it back in 1990. It was a job where I felt that one person could make a bit of a difference to not only patients, but also staff and the whole organisation. It's where one person can make an impact. So I'm just going to ask you both. I'll chuck you on the spot because you did me earlier on about on the stats. You know, why do you do it? Phil, I'll start with you. Why do you do infection prevention?
Probably similar, Martin. It's something that I've been able to understand, and it's something that
you're saying it's easy.
Well, it's just that the whole prevention, the whole infection chain thing, I guess, was something that I cottoned on to early in my career. And I also, you know, my career started at the time when we were getting lots of, you know, young guys presenting to the hospital with, you know, what they called in those days full-blown AIDS, and they had very short prognosis. And so that sort of really triggered my interest in infectious diseases, infection prevention, and the whole infection thing, I guess. And that sort of kept me going all that way along. And there's no 2 days alike. You turn up to work in infection prevention and you never know what's going to happen. And these days it's because, you know, I work with good people. You know, we have similar interests, and I have this little voice in the back of my mind that always tells me the bugs are going to win. And that sort of throws up a bit of a challenge to me. So, you know, in the twilight of my career, I guess I'm hoping that, you know, you can make some further impact with what's left. But yeah, that's probably why I stay in the industry.
Brett, you're not in the twilight of your career. Why do you do this?
I do it because I actually want to improve patient outcomes. And not just patients, residents in the context of aged care, and also clients in the context of other facets of infection prevention. That's why I do it. I just want to make things better for people, because I think ultimately that's why I got into it. We know working in this field that it's full of problems, full of challenges, and there's lots of things coming our way. And like Phil mentioned about the bugs that are going to stop them from winning. So knowing that, I think I'd like to make sure I'm part of that solution if I can. And while Phil was talking there, and I had a quick search, Martin, on adverts in Australia, and how they were selling infection prevention control positions. I probably looked at about 4 or 5 just very quickly. One of the big interesting things that I saw in the adverts as a theme was a lot of it was about where you want to work, like the beauty of the region that you might be working in, or the or the beaches, or the
you wouldn't get that in the UK. Come and work
or whatever
in
it might
Birmingham.
be.
Or come and work in. Yeah.
But one of them I did see. It said, "Join a supportive, collaborative team who are focused on achieving the best patient outcomes," and that might be perhaps what you're starting to refer to.
It's more about why we do it, though, I think. And you know, for me, I now know I'm never going to know half of what I really should know or want to know. You know, it's because every day's a school day in infection prevention. You know, I'll never know everything. You know, that's the beauty of it. You're always thinking, why is that? Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? I don't know that. I love that about it. You know, you might know more than other people, but you're never going to know as much as some people, especially in all the niches, because it's so broad, isn't it, in infection prevention? You know, when I qualified, I was the expert because I'd done a 1-year part-time course in infection prevention. But now I know I'm so not expert. It's unreal, really.
Before we finish 2025, are there particular things that you're looking forward to, or conferences that you're looking forward to or planning on attending, but anything else you're looking forward to, Phil?
There's a few. I'd love to go to all the conferences, of course. ICPIC is on again in 2025. I'd be hoping to get to that. I don't know. I might have to push over to Martin. Something to look forward to in the next 12 months.
Anything in your work coming up that you're interested in?
Yeah, look, there's always lots of interesting things at work that we're doing. We're doing a lot of work with aged care at the moment, infection prevention, and that's a new area for me. And every time we do a little bit of work in there, it sort of reveals a huge gap, more gaps that we hadn't realised that exist in aged care. And like Martin, I'm sort of, you know, prepared to put the time into aged care because we might end up there soon. But probably the aged care area, I think, is going to be interesting. And I'm always fascinated about AI. I've got no idea where that's going to land with infection prevention. The potential, the possibilities seem endless. So I'm excited to see what that will throw up.
We might see a lot more AI-related research coming out in the next couple of years. Yeah, what about you, man?
I'm looking forward to trying to get my golf handicap down next year.
More time on the golf course.
More time on the golf course. I've been horrific all year, and it's embarrassing. So I need to improve on that. But no, work-wise, I'm not working, so that's also fine. I'll look at things I'm interested in doing. So, and I'm looking forward very much to coming to see you guys in May.
Yes.
When I'll get a chance to tour Australia again, see my good friends down there. Apart from that, I haven't got any conferences on the agenda at the moment, so we'll just see what comes along, really.
Well, what are you up to, Brett? Are you going to open the batting for Australia?
Yeah, it might be mine, that's for sure.
It might be your daughter, though.
I'm looking forward to having a nice break in January on a personal note, and I'm also looking forward to the results of the Happen trial. They may or may not come out next year, but that's something I am looking forward to seeing, or looking forward to getting into towards the back end of that. And I'm not sure what conferences. I do have a few lined up. I'm going to Hong Kong and also ICPIC and the Japanese Infection Control Conference. So looking forward to those as well. But I think work-wise, Happen and planning another trial, which I would hope that will get up and running in 2025. So, on that note,
we seem to be ending a bit downbeat, don't we?
We do. I know we can't finish.
What's going on here? We can't finish on that. So on that note,
hey, okay. So I forgot to turn on the AI companion on Zoom for this chat. I've only had it going for about 10 minutes. So if I hit the AI companion, it says catch up on what I've missed. And it says it's analyzing only for the last 5 minutes what we have been talking about. And it says we're discussing our interests for the upcoming year. And Phil expresses interest in attending conferences and mentions his ongoing work in aged care. Martin humorously states his goal to improve his golf handicap.
Oh, was that humorous?
I like that Phil states his interest in attending conferences. Phil is touting himself to conference organisers the world around.
No, I do like how it said Martin humorously states he's going to.
Yes.
I'm glad he picked up on the humour, because to be honest, my handicap's so bad, I'm not finding it very funny. So, yeah.
The conversation ends on a lighthearted note when they realise they were sounding downbeat.
Well, AI's got a long way to go then, hasn't it? Okay, guys. Well, happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Thanks to everyone for their
thanks for the year
support this year and listening. And thanks so much. Well, when we go to places, it's so great when people come up to us and say,
"Oh yeah,
thanks for doing the podcast," because we don't get much in terms of we can feel like we're just talking to the abyss. So it's great when people do that. So thanks for people listening, and thanks for coming up and letting us know what you think. If you don't like us, then just don't listen to us. So yeah.
And thank you both, and thank you everybody. Have a good year. Well, a good holiday celebration.
Bill's getting near the abyss.
That's all.
Okay. Bye.
See you later, gents. Bye bye.